Well, greetings and a very warm welcome to all you precious saints out there on the internet. This is Annie from Salvation Media, and after what has been a very long gap, for which I apologise, we are finally getting back into the book of Daniel, which we were getting along with quite well. So now we'll jump back in and hopefully be able to pick up the threads of where we left off. And we were in Daniel chapter 5, and this is part 2. Daniel chapter 5 deals with God's judgment of human pride. In the last video, we saw the great feast given by Belshazzar, who ruled Babylon as the crown prince. He invited all his nobles, their wives and concubines, to a feast. They were not only drinking gallons of wine, but far worse, Belshazzar ordered that the golden vessels that his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem be brought to his banqueting hall, so that he and his guests could drink from them, effectively mocking the God of Israel and desecrating the sacred vessels that had been used in worship of the one true God. In their debauched and drunken state, these pagans were worshipping and praising their own false gods and idols, and this was an abomination to the Lord. A line had been crossed, and the wrath of Yahweh provoked. Then all of a sudden, handwriting appeared on the white plaster wall opposite the king's table. Belshazzar was absolutely terrified. It says that the blood drained from his face and he went into complete panic mode, saying that to whoever could tell him the meaning of the words would be given a costly robe, a gold chain of office, and they would be elevated to the third ruler in the kingdom. Of course, as we saw last time, those pesky Chaldeans, enchanters and diviners, soothsayers, fortune tellers, and the like, had no clue as to the meaning of the words. Happily, there was somebody who remembered the person who could decipher the words. This was the queen, who remembered that there was a person who had helped Nebuchadnezzar in his day, and she says this: there is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, that means grandfather, your father the king, made him the chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astronomers. That was effectively the magi who Daniel would later go on to instruct in the ways of God, especially regarding the way that the Hebrews understood astronomy, not astrology, but astronomy. So Daniel is brought in before the king. The king says to Daniel, "You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you." Belshazzar says this: "Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in to me to read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not show the interpretation of the matter." That's verse 15. And predictably, these so-called wise men had no wisdom whatsoever, because they did not know the one who had sent the message. Belshazzar, by this time, is a desperate man, because the writing is on the wall, and he obviously knows deep in his bones that the meaning may not be good, especially not for him. So Daniel says to him, "Let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. So basically, Daniel's saying you can keep your gifts, but I'll give you the interpretation nonetheless. Let's unpack what Daniel says to the king and the interpretation in its meaning and start to compare what happened in literal, physical, historical Babylon and compare it to the end time spiritual Babylon, because that's going to give us the discernment that we need to understand when things happen in this world on a global scale and how God is exercising his judgment upon the wicked. Firstly, Daniel gives Belshazzar a history lesson. And he says this in verses 19 to 20. And because of the greatness that he gave him, that is Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar's grandfather, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. Because of the grandeur which the Lord bestowed on Nebuchadnezzar, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled. You will remember from Daniel 3 when Nebuchadnezzar makes a massive golden statue, a golden image, and sets it on the plains of Dura in the land of Shinar. Then issues a decree that all his court and subject peoples must come and pay homage to it. The punishment for disobeying was to be thrown into a fiery furnace, as of course the 3 Hebrew boys were. Most commentaries will say that this idolatrous image was an image of Nebuchadnezzar himself, but it doesn't actually say that in the text. It was an image of a supreme being, a god of Nebuchadnezzar's own imagination. And the whole scene should make us think of Revelation chapter 13, where another image is set up before whom all must bow down or die. This is a huge prophetic parallel because here Nebuchadnezzar is a type for the Antichrist who sets up a similar system as a way of retaining power and control. As we discussed in the video on Daniel 3, even the number 666 crops up in the description of the image. And we spoke about how the 4th figure in the fire with the Hebrew boys was a Christophany, indicating that in the Revelation 13 scenario, it may well be the Jewish and Gentile believers that will be saved in the fire, but not out of it necessarily. Daniel recounts now that because of the pride of Nebuchadnezzar, the boaster then becomes the beast. He was driven away from basically civilization and he turned into some beast-like creature. It says that he ate grass like a beast and he remained in this state for 7 years. See how it says his heart was turned into that of a beast, his heart referring to his mind, his reasoning, his attitudes, and his treatment of his subject peoples. The Antichrist is, of course, described as the beast. However, unlike Nebuchadnezzar, the human king, who is brought low and eventually humbled, the Antichrist will be satanically possessed, and there will be no opportunity for redemption. He is already doomed to be destroyed in the lake of fire. Belshazzar is a reprobate. Daniel makes this clear. You are his successor, O Belshazzar, and you knew all of this, and yet you did not humble yourself, for you defied the Lord of heaven and ordered these cups from his temple brought before you. You and your nobles and your wives and concubines have been drinking wine from them while praising gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, gods that neither see nor hear nor know anything at all. But you have not honoured the God who gives you the breath of life and controls your destiny. He has been given over to his sin, and neither will he be offered another chance of redemption, because he refused to humble his heart, even though he knew his grandfather had been humbled by the Most High God. Belshazzar was without excuse. Nebuchadnezzar's story would have been proclaimed and spread and repeated multiple times throughout the history of Babylon. Once Nebuchadnezzar was raised back up, his reason returned to him, and he proclaimed to everybody how he had been humbled and was ready to declare Daniel's God to be the Most High God, who rules over the kingdoms of men. This story would have caught fire in the sense that people would have been talking about it for years to come. It was such a significant story for an emperor to be humbled and cast down, and then to be acting like a beast, because the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men. In outright dissipated rebellion, Belshazzar orders the vessels of gold and silver, the treasures from the temple in Jerusalem, be brought in and used as drinking vessels. These vessels were dedicated for use in sacred worship of the Most High God, and they were desecrated. Why would Belshazzar do this? Perhaps he harbored resentment towards Yahweh, the God of the Jews. Belshazzar's father, Nabonidus, revered Sin, the moon god of Mesopotamia. So it's quite possible that his son did as well. His order to fetch the gold and silver vessels was deliberate, defiant, and blasphemous. Belshazzar was demonstrating that he placed the highest value on himself. Well, now the Lord is going to evaluate him. Last time, we saw Belshazzar's reaction of utter terror when a ghostly hand appeared on the wall opposite his banqueting table and writes these words, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. What do these words mean, and why is only Daniel able to interpret them? Last time we spoke about how these prophetic words can be a bit like a telegram, giving only the essential points of the message. This is another telegram from God, and of course, only a man of God can then understand it. What do the gold and silver temple vessels really represent? They represent God and his eternal values, the eternal values of love. The grace of God and the blood of Christ are unchanging and a far superior currency by which God's love bought and redeemed rebellious men and women. Human lives are relative and always changing. Moreover, humans mostly measure values in terms of money. So God says, okay, Belshazzar, let's get the measure of you and test your value. How much are you really worth? Because of Daniel's knowledge of how Hebrew works, where one word can have several different meanings, he was able to interpret the writing on the wall. Belshazzar weighs up like this: a mina, a tekel, and 2 halves of a shekel. These are ordinary Aramaic terms for different weights of precious metals. There would have been no coinage yet, so gold and silver would have been weighed out using scales. How do we decipher this then? You could call it a code of thoughts, or, as I've said already, a telegram from God. Mene means the same as mina in Hebrew. The word mina comes from the verb meaning counting or measuring. It was an ancient unit of weight and currency used in the Near East for gold and silver. It was equal to about 1.25 pounds and was divided into 60 shekels. Tekel comes from the same root word as the Hebrew shekel. Tekel, used as a verb, means to weigh in the balance. A shekel, used as a noun, means a certain weight in the balances. Now let's break down upharsin. U or u is the Aramaic word for and. Farsin comes from the verb paras, which means to divide. So farsin means divisions or fractions. So the writing says literally mina shekel, half shekel, a bit similar to saying, for example, £10, £10, £1 and 50p. Daniel, knowing both Aramaic and Hebrew and under the inspiration of God who sent the telegram, is able to interpret these words as verbs. And so the telegram reads like this: numbered, weighed, divided. Because Daniel knows the God who sent it, he can see that these verbs need a subject and an object. The subject is God and the object is the days. But of course, Daniel, under the Lord's inspiration, knows what's really being said here. Meaning, God has numbered and evaluated your kingdom and put it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances, the scales, and found deficient. Perez, your kingdom has been divided, fractionated, as it were. God has counted your days, Belshazzar, and they're coming to an end. As we know from Daniel 2, the empire of Babylon was given over to the Medes and Persians. But Belshazzar still doesn't get it, does he? He's told you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. And then it says this: then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple. A chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. If Belshazzar had heeded Daniel and repented of his pride, things might have gone differently. But by this time, he had been given over to his sin. And this was indeed to be Babylon's last night. And we read in verses 30 to 31 that same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. But now I would like to pull out some points of comparison between ancient and end time spiritual Babylon. Let's try now to transition and compare literal, physical, ancient, geographic Babylon with end time spiritual Babylon. There are several scriptural verses between the Old Testament and New Testament comparing between ancient Babylon and spiritual Babylon that show the pattern which emerges on this particular night and is going to be the pattern that emerges when Babylon, spiritual Babylon, falls and Jesus Christ comes back. So we're just skipping back to Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. Which says this: in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Chaldea, to the house of his God. He brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. This is basically the capture and persecution of God's people that happened when they were taken to literal geographic Babylon, the heart of the neo-Babylonian empire. And where was the neo-Babylonian empire situated? This was, of course, the land of Shinar, that was the heart of Nimrod's empire and the place of the legendary Tower of Babel. We must bear in mind that most probably the DNA of the Nephilim, that is, the children born of the Genesis 6 incursion of the rebel angels who mated with human women and produced a race of giants, which then corrupted the whole earth, their DNA had somehow managed to survive the global flood. There are various theories about how this happened, which we'll explore in other videos, but for now, it's enough to understand that Shinar was the place where, after the flood, humanity deliberately disobeyed the Lord's specific instructions to go out into all the world and repopulate it. Instead, they rebelled and began building temples to demon gods, most likely their fallen angelic ancestors, and communicated with the dark side of the supernatural in an attempt to avoid another massive judgment event from God Almighty. The Tower of Babel thus became synonymous with the birth of all false religion, allied to political state power and man's ingenuity to avoid the judgment of God. From Babel, those false religions have spread throughout all the earth to corrupt the hearts and minds of men. Such religions have always persecuted the people of God. Moreover, as we are told by Paul, the whole world is under the power of the evil one. We are all, each and every one of us, prisoners in a spiritual Babylonian system, unless, of course, we experience true spiritual rebirth and restoration to God's family that assures us a future in eternity restored to our original blueprint. In Revelation, false religion is presented as Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. She is drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. She is riding a scarlet beast. Now, in the end time scenario, we might think of this as the final manifestation of a false religious system, or an unholy convergence of all false religions covering the entire globe. The globalist agenda being pushed by the UN is essentially also a religion that initially governs and drives a state political system. This will not be something new. Nations have used various creeds and religions to manipulate their populations since the dawn of time. Many empires have risen and fallen. This is not something that happens in the end times only. Take a look, for example, at this picture of an ancient Sumerian relief sculpture. And what do you see? A woman riding a beast. We can even identify this woman. She is Inanna, the goddess, the ancient goddess of sex and war, called the Queen of Heaven, who was later known as Ishtar, Ashtaroth, or Astarte in the Canaanite religions, Aphrodite in Greece, and Venus by the Romans. Moreover, she was a binary goddess. That is, she could manifest as male or female. She is the ultimate goddess of wokery, we could say, and she is still alive and well and very busy deceiving the whole world with her blasphemies. Woke transgenderism is violent and hate-filled, and it is literally on every continent now. Also in alignment with those entities and nations that hate Israel. What is the beast that the woman is riding upon? Well, once again, we have our clue from an ancient Sumerian relief, a strange beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. There's nothing new here, folks. This is the same beast that turns up in Revelation 13, a demonically driven person who is given power by Satan to set up an entire political, military, and economic state to enslave people to the will of the Prince of Darkness himself. We could say that this was the beast Mark I, and we know there have been many diabolical, satanic, tyrant, beastly rulers since the dawn of human history. But we're building up now to see the very last one, who will exceed them all in power, cruelty, and ambition. The pattern that we see in ancient Babylon is of a false religious ideological system controlling or trying to control a tyrannical state. These are the two beasts that work together to deceive the whole world. Judgment has already been pronounced through the mouths of the ancient Hebrew prophets. Jeremiah 51 verse 13 says this, "O you who dwell by many waters, abundant in treasure, your end has come." On the surface of things, this verse seems to be talking about ancient, literal, physical, geographical Babylon, which was judged by God, as we have seen. Is there going to be another literal, great geographical Babylon in the last days? Maybe, but maybe not. Her name in the book of Revelation is Mystery Babylon, meaning that it could be a geographical location revealed in our future. Then again, Rome was called Babylon in John's day, and some Bible scholars maintain that a one-world religious system will emerge from the area of the ancient Roman Empire. Some say it will be an apostate church joined with an interfaith false spirituality that embraces all creeds. Others say it's Islam or even Chrislam, the blending of both Islam and Christianity. Then again, even apostate Jerusalem is called Babylon by the apostles, and there are those Bible scholars today who maintain that Talmudic Judaism is Mystery Babylon, and they are very resistant to Messianic Jews. In a sense, too, Satan has turned every major city on the planet into a Babylon. Perhaps, too, we need to think even deeper than this. The New Jerusalem is a city in the heavenlies that will come down when the earthly and heavenly realms are united again in the millennial kingdom. This is still a mystery to us. It may well be that Mystery Babylon is a very real city in the fallen realm that affects everything that happens on earth and gives rise to an apostate church in the last days. We know that there is an entire hierarchy of demonic beings in the fallen realm who take their orders from Satan himself. They have interfered with what happens on our planet all through the ages. Firstly, by trying to corrupt the gene pool and prevent the birth of the promised Redeemer, the seed of the woman. This was the reason for the Genesis 6 incursion of the fallen angels. Those rebel angel beings are now held in chains of darkness somewhere in the region of the Euphrates River. Their children, the Nephilim, were giants in stature and so corrupted the earth that the Lord had to send a flood. Peter and Jude refer to this event, and it's something we may have a hard time understanding because it is so strange to us, but it was known about by the apostles. Jude says this, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. As Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Suffice it to say, the dark side was unable to prevent the first coming of Christ, and they will be absolutely powerless to stop his second coming. And when Christ comes again, both men and angels will be judged. We may not understand all about Genesis 6, but we can understand that there are principalities and powers that provoke all the wickedness we see in the earth. And Babylon is a constant motif through all of the scriptures that refers to the manifestation of persecuting wickedness in the earth. The wrath of God is going to put an end to the bloodthirsty harlot in all her many disguises. Look at the spiritual application in Revelation 17, which says, "Then one of the seven angels with the seven bowls came and said to me, 'Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters.'" Many waters we have already seen are people groups, the nations that the harlot rules over, where she dominates the attitudes and mindsets of multitudes. Babylon in Belshazzar's day was still the superpower of the known world, extending from into Syria all the way to Egypt, reigning over the kings of the earth, trading with multitudes, exerting her dominance over multitudes. Mystery Babylon, the woman who you saw, is the great city reigning over the kings of the earth that committed sexual immorality with her. Sexual immorality in the Bible is always a reference to spiritual adultery. So this religious and political system leads the kings of the earth into idolatry and worship of false gods, of materialism, commercialism, war, and perverted sexuality. All we find in the future already has its explanation in the past. Jeremiah 46:10 says this, "For the day belongs to the Lord God of hosts, a day of vengeance, so as to avenge himself on his foes, and the sword will devour and be satiated, and drink its fill of their blood, for there will be a slaughter for the Lord God of hosts in the land of the north, by the river Euphrates." What day is this talking about? The day of the Lord, the day of vengeance of our God. Just as ancient Babylon fell in one night in Daniel's day, so Mystery Babylon the Great will fall. In Daniel, verse 30 to 31, it says that that same night Belshazzar was slain so that Darius the Mede could receive the kingdom at the age of 62. Can we find a prophetic parallel? In Revelation 16, verse 12, it says this, "And the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared." Darius was king of the Medes, who came out of the east. Cyrus came out of the east and actually ended the Babylonian exile in Daniel's day. Who exactly are these kings of the east then that Revelation talks about? There is a debate amongst Bible scholars. Some say it's speaking about the entire Euphrates River actually drying up so that the armies of the east, that is to say a coalition of nations to the east of the Euphrates, can move their actual physical armies across to the plain of Megiddo for the great battle against the Lord himself. Others say it's making the way for Jesus to return with the hosts of heaven, who will come from the east to execute judgment on spiritual Babylon. It might mean both. Another common denominator between ancient and modern Babylon is the judgment on pride. Daniel 4, verse 30 says this, "The king exclaimed, 'Is this not Babylon the Great, which myself which I myself have built by the might of my power as a royal residence for the glory of my majesty. And then Revelation 17, verse 18 says this: the woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. And if you read Revelation 18, you'll see that 6 times it talks about the great city of Babylon, time and time again. The Bible is a tale of 2 cities, as we know. Jerusalem, Zion, the city of God, the city of the great king. Its inhabitants are supposed to be a holy and royal priesthood, holding up the light of Yahweh's truth and values to the Gentile nations. Israel was meant to be one nation under God. Ultimately, there will be a new Jerusalem coming down from the heavens like a bride. Her inhabitants will be those who have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. By contrast, the other city, Babylon, is a bloodlusting whore who perverts and enslaves the masses and ruthlessly persecutes anyone who rejects her values, which are the values of the fallen realm. There is an Old Testament call for God's people to come out of Babylon in Jeremiah 51:6. Flee from Babylon, escape with your lives, do not be destroyed in her punishment, for this is the time of the Lord's vengeance. He will pay her what she deserves. And in Revelation 18, there is a final call for God's people to come out of spiritual Babylon, out of confusion and compromise, and to abandon everything that is preventing us from surrendering fully to the Lord Jesus Christ. This is the final call before the mark of the beast is instituted and God's wrath poured out. It says this: and then I heard another voice from heaven say, come out of her, my people, so you will not share in her sins or contract any of her plagues. And here's another parallel. In Jeremiah 51, verses 63 to 64, it says this: when you finish reading this scroll, tie a stone to it and cast it into the Euphrates River. Then you are to say, in the same way Babylon will sink and never rise again because of the disaster that I will bring upon her. The fall of ancient Babylon is well documented. The story of how the Medes and Persians worked together to conquer the unconquerable city that night is worthy of Homer's Iliad. Multiple ancient historians, including Herodotus, Xenophon, Berossus, and the Babylonian Chronicles, all describe the incredible events of that evening. On the night of October the 12th, 539 BC, the Persian army completed work north of Babylon on a dam across the Euphrates River. They diverted the flow of the river to a nearby lake, greatly reducing the amount of water flowing towards the city of Babylon. Within a few hours, the river level was barely thigh-high, low enough for the Persian soldiers to wade up the riverbed running through the city. The watchmen on the wall towers above the city would have been scanning the horizon for large troop ships coming up the Euphrates or ground forces marching to the walls. So they never noticed the columns of men quietly wading through the drying riverbed below under the cover of darkness. Therefore, sensing no threat from the water, the Babylonians left the city walls and gates facing the river undefended. The Persian troops simply scaled the walls from the riverbanks, opened the gate to the city, and entered the city without a fight. Herodotus says that the city was so vast that even after the outer parts of the city had been taken by the Persians, the residents in the centre of the city still had no idea that their city had fallen. He says the Babylonians in the centre of the city were engaged in a festival, dancing and revelling until the invaders overtook them. Just as Daniel pronounced Belshazzar's downfall, the troops were probably at the doors of the palace. Babylon fell in one night, and this was a partial fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy against Babylon the Great. We find the ultimate fulfillment of the doom of the entire Babylonian world system in the book of Revelation. In Revelation 14, verse 8, it says this: Then a second angel followed, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, who has made all the nations drink the wine of her passion and of her immorality. Bible scholars call this fallen, fallen the prophetic past tense. That is, it's writing about a future event in the past tense because it's predestined to happen in the plan of God. And when it happens, it will echo and fulfill Jeremiah's prophecy completely. It says this in Revelation 18. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory, and he called out with a mighty voice, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become the dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean and detestable bird. This Babylon is the dwelling of demons, in a prison of every unclean spirit and detestable bird. These birds are a Bible image for the demonic evil spirits, powers, and principalities that have fallen away from God. And it carries on, for all the nations have drunk the wine of the passions of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins and share her plagues. For her sins are heaped as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds, or mix her a double portion, as it says on the screen, mix a double portion in her own cup that she has mixed. As she has glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see. For this reason, her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire. For mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. And the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her torment, her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city, Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. Revelation 18:21 says this, Then a mighty angel picked up a stone, the size of a great millstone, and cast it into the sea, saying, With such violence, the great city of Babylon will be cast down, never to be seen again. So we can see here that there is a real parallel with the fall of ancient Babylon and the fall of an end times future Babylon, whether this is an actual geographical location that manifests in our future, or whether this is referring to the entire global spiritual Babylonian system. Belshazzar thought his city was safe, so he feasted drunkenly, toasting his demon gods with the sacred vessels used to worship Yahweh in Jerusalem's temple. He profaned something that was holy to the Lord, and this was an abomination. The state took something that was sacred and blasphemed it. What's happening in our culture then? Well, the state has taken something that is God-given, our Judeo-Christian values, and principles are literally being trashed and profaned or even obliterated in a totally blasphemous way. God declared there are two genders, male and female, and nothing in between. God declared man is made in the image of God. The state says we are evolved from an amoebic goo, and we can decide which gender we want to be. We can even be several at one time. The Lord declares marriage is between one man and woman. The state says you can mix it all up. We could go on and on at great length. The point here is that our culture is now so morally degraded and corrupt that we are now overripe for judgment. Babylon is going to fall. And Paul talks about this in this judgment that is coming in 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 to 6. And he says this, now as to the times and the epochs or seasons, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you, for you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labour pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. But you, brethren, are not in the darkness, that the day would overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. End times, Babylon the Great will be partying, saying, all's good, peace and safety, and then boom, her destruction will come in an hour, just as when Belshazzar in ancient Babylon was saying, peace and safety, boom, his destruction came in one night. We who know the scriptures will not be taken by surprise if we stay alert, prayerful, Holy Spirit filled, and watchful. If we are faithfully serving the Lord, then sudden destruction will not come upon us at the day of the Lord. Like Noah before the flood, we will be hidden in our ark, who is Jesus Christ himself.